Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
So don't go breaking my heart. I won't go breaking your heart.
And welcome back to The Law Show on CL 650. We're talking with David Halkett, partner at McQuarrie Hunter, and Sarah Morse from McQuarrie Hunter about family law, breakup of relationships and divorces. And before the break, we talked about the definition of a spouse, and you can be married or just living together. And we've had in the last, I think it's been 10 years now, same-sex marriages. Mm-hmm. And have you seen any same-sex divorces yet?
Personally, I haven't done a divorce in that, but I have acted for in a same-sex couple relationship.
Mm-hmm. Sarah?
Yep, I'm starting to see those come in now as well, dealing with separation agreements for same-sex couples. And
is there any difference?
No, they're treated the same. They had been treated the same for support purposes since the late 90s. Mm-hmm. But now, of course, they have the same rights to divide property as well. Once they were allowed to be married, they could. And, of course, now same-sex common law couples have the same rights as opposite-sex couples.
So it doesn't really matter in the eyes of the law. They're just different names, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Now, when does the law look at the beginning of a separation versus a divorce? Can you explain the difference between separating and divorce?
Okay. Well, separation is just when you're no longer living together.
So when does that start? Like literally the day you moved out kind of thing?
Well, it can start even when you're still in the same home. Obviously, the easiest is someone just moves out of the home and there you go. The definition really from the case law is a physical separation with one party saying in their own mind that the relationship is over. Mm-hmm. So you can be living in separate parts of the home but still think that you're still together, so you're not separated. But the minute one of the two parties thinks that the relationship is over and there's a physical separation, then you are separated.
So, Sarah, all you need to say is, I don't want to be with you anymore. I'm out.
I'm done.
Yeah, and then that's when it starts.
It's sort of the intent behind it, yes.
Do you get arguments about they never said that?
No, because I've never had that as an argument. What we normally end up seeing is going through the facts of were they still living in separate parts of the home? Mm-hmm. What was the relationship like at the time? I remember at one case I had, this was about 10 years ago, and when my client said they were separated and the wife insisted they weren't, and he says, well, we were separated. She goes, no, we weren't. We had sex on Valentine's Day. Ah. So she said they weren't separated, but in his mind they were. It didn't make a difference in the division of assets. Usually the date of separation is more of a factor of when you can actually get divorced.
So it has to be a year, from my understanding, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Right. Although it can be a factor now in crystallizing when the debts, what the debt value is and what the asset value is at the time of separation. It used to be there was you had to get one of four tests met. Now it's just, you just say you're separated.
So are you liable for your spouse's debts up to that date? So if you get separated, say you do move out of the family home and you rent an apartment, but then your spouse goes on a spending spree knowing that you're going to have to pay for half of the Harley Davidson and the new boat and, whatever, is that allowed?
Your argument would be that those were after separation debts.
Right.
The only time that after separation debts kick in is if they were needed to keep the family afloat because support wasn't being paid or something of the sort.
So you had to buy groceries and all of those things, right?
Exactly.
Pay the mortgage and things like that.
But if you are separated and one spouse runs up debts afterwards, on the face of it, according to the law, that would be your debt, subject to a variation by the court.
So you are liable until divorced for everything they spend?
No, it would be you're on the hook. I meant the person who incurs the debt.
Oh, I see.
Would be on the hook.
Okay. So when people get to you in your office, are they there? Are they ready to pull the pin, or are they kind of questioning still by the time they come to see a lawyer?
I would say it definitely depends. I think you get the clients that by the time they've come in to see you, they've made up their mind. They're ready to go. They've got their bag full of documents and they literally want the divorce to happen that second. Mm-hmm. And then there's other people that come in and they're not sure what they want to do. They come in and explain what's been happening and they're perhaps not emotionally ready. I think David and I have talked about this before about how your case isn't going to settle, if it's going to settle, until the parties are emotionally ready. And one person might be, and the other person, it might take 6 months for them to be emotionally capable of saying, yes, I'm ready to deal with this. So
what's your advice in that situation when they're not emotionally ready?
I tell my clients, don't settle for something unless you're willing or you're able to do it. I may say this is, I think, the best.
You mean
you're gonna get.
emotionally able to go through the process?
Exactly, because the last thing you want is to settle a case and then as the client the next day say, geez, I shouldn't have done that. And you have almost all of them have buyer's remorse to some extent. But there's nothing worse than when they kick themselves later. So I say, if you're not ready to settle it, then don't. There's a lot of other steps you can go through. You get more documentation out of the other side, more financial disclosure, etc. And then you might be in a position. It seems that usually in most cases, both parties are somewhat on the same page as to when they're ready to sit down and resolve it.
Mm-hmm. So by the time they get to you.
Yeah.
And how many have reversed their decision and gone back with their spouse? Is it a low percentage?
Maybe 5%. I think it depends. I've had cases where someone's come in to see me just for legal advice, and then they've come back 5 years later for the actual separation. They were thinking of separating, but they wanted to give it one last shot, especially if, it's a big decision. You've been married for 20 years and you have the young children, and there's a lot of assets that you're going to see going out the door and cash going out the door, flowing both ways. And so they may have some sober second thought of it. But usually when someone goes to a lawyer at some point for legal advice on a separation, they're probably going to be separated at some point.
So with the values we have of real estate, and people are paper rich, the house has gone up so much, are they quicker to come and see you or more hesitant to come and see you? Because they might look at it, well, I get half of this and I can start my new life, which is, a substantial amount of money, or they look at it the other way.
I've never really had anyone come in to see me in my 20 plus years of doing family law that thought this was an opportune time to separate because of what assets I could get. That may be people get divorced and separated in good economic times or bad economic times. But no one's ever come in and say, if I leave now, I'll walk away with X dollars.
Right.
Because even though that ends up being a factor at the end, I don't think it factors into whether or not you want to be with your spouse.
Right.
But I think where it does come into play is some people will come in and they'll look at the financial picture and go, I can't afford to buy my partner out. I won't be able to afford to send my kids to hockey, things like that. So it's a reality check for people sometimes, and they realize that if I'm going to do this, it is going to change our lives in so many ways, change the lives of our kids. So it can, because of where we live, it can be a factor in whether someone proceeds with a separation or divorce.
I had a guy come in once that I thought I was going to have to call 911 to get a defibrillator in, because when I told him what he was going to end up having to pay for child and spousal support, his face almost hit the floor. I thought he was going to start grabbing his chest like Red Fox on Sanford and Son, because of how much it was going to be.
There's a reference. There's an old reference, David.
So, it was, so it does factor in sometimes of whether or not someone wants to give it another shot.
Right. Okay. So when someone comes to see you, what do they need to bring?
Everything.
Usually what I like is lists of their assets. So the house.
Just general idea or specific?
Because no one's going to know the exact dollar figures. We can find that out. But if you have a pension, tell me you're in a pension. Now, Sarah and I, we're experienced enough that we know that if someone is in a union, they're probably going to have a pension. But, it's always nice to have that formalized by them. What are their RSPs, TFSAs? What are their debts, credit card debts? How many credit cards do they have?
Car payments.
Exactly.
Credit card payments.
Is it leased or is it owned on the vehicle? Because if it's a lease vehicle, there's no asset. But if it's owned, and what are the payments? What's the equity? And so we don't want to know all that stuff.
And how many surprises are there when it comes to spouses? One's running their own finances, the other's running their own finances, and they find out that, wait a second, my wife or my husband had $50,000 in credit card debt, and I had no idea.
Definitely seen that happen. Or I've had quite a few cases where one spouse knew the other person had a pension but didn't know much about it. Turns out to be a hugely valuable pension, or not even knowing about a pension because it was from a job that they did a number of years ago and things like that. So there's there are cases where there's quite a few surprises, and then there's others where everything's on the table and you're aware of it.
It is shocking that in 2017 there's still that many spouses who don't know what their other spouse has. When I just look back at my parents, my dad was the one who worked and my mom stayed home, but they pretty well knew what they all had. My wife doesn't know the dollar value of what I have, but she has a pretty good idea of what we own together. But there's people who come in and have no idea if there's a pension, if there's RSPs, or
they might not even know what their mortgage is at.
Mm-hmm. So if you have, we'll go down Sarah's example. So I worked for 15 years for the city of Richmond, and I have a pension with them, and then I got married. But then I went to work for the city of Coquitlam, and I worked for them, and they know that you have a pension from the city of Coquitlam. So, does that pension that you earned before you were married, is that included in the settlement, or can that be exempt?
No, it's not included. All you divide on a pension is the what you accrued while you were together.
Right.
But what would happen in that is it's likely the same pension. So it would be together and it would go to your overall years of service, and that works in the percentage the spouse is entitled to get. If you worked 35 years in total and you were together 19, she's entitled to 1/2 of the 19 over 35.
Oh, okay. So it's just number of years pumped together, how much went into the pension during those years.
Yeah.
And then divide it that way.
Now, the one thing in that situation, what's interesting, if it's the same pension, the actual divided amount is the pension portion that you receive, or your pension when you retire, and it's usually based on an average of your best 5 years. So to some extent, it does factor in at the end of the day. So
the best 5 years are when you were together.
Well, usually it's the last 5 years you worked. So if you were together,
Mm-hmm.
So
okay, so are people more likely to come to see you with children, or less likely? Are they wait longer to come and see you?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I've had people separating that I know they stayed together a few extra years for the children. I've had some that have come in, the children are 1-3 years old. Mm-hmm. So it's all across the spectrum. I think maybe people try to stay together a little longer if there's children, simply because when you are married and you have children, you expect that your family's going to stay together.
Do you get that classic, the kids are 18 or 20 now and they've gone to university?
Definitely.
That's when the kids leave and go to school. Yep. That's when the divorces happen.
Or when when the kids are about to leave home, and the prospect of now being alone with your spouse, I think, prompts people into action if there's been some discord for a number of years.
I have to look at you now?
There's no one to distract us anymore. So, I mean, because a lot of my clients either have really young kids or older kids. You don't see as many with I would say, teenagers, of the sort of like the 10 to 14, 15-year-olds. Because
so that's when people wait a little longer. They say, okay, the kids
it's only a couple more years. We can eke it out, sort of thing. Yeah.
And I think that it also, the irony is, when the kids are older, sometimes it's harder on them than when the children are really young, because I've had clients that they've basically been separated. Their kids don't remember the parents being together. Whereas then the ones when they're separating when they're 14 or 15, it's harder on them, because then it's like, well, your choice. Where do you want to live, with mom or with dad? And
they get that choice?
They have a voice. When they get to be a certain age, pretty well, no one forces them to live where they don't want to. But then they get really shrewd and start playing you off each other. Well, dad let me play PS4 till like midnight, and mom that makes me turn it off at 8. So of course I want to live with dad, that kind of stuff.
Jeez.
Yeah, the Disneyland parent thing.
Yeah.
So I think it is easier for people to separate when kids are young. They're adaptable, they're flexible, they get quality parenting time, hopefully, with both parents. So I think it can be a little easier.
All right. When we come back, we're going to get into spousal support and child support. And David talked about one client came in and almost fell over because of how much he'd have to pay. We'll pick that up next on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.